Disturbia is a mystery thriller directed by DJ Caruso. So the movie starts with a kid named Kale on a fishing trip with his dad where they bond over some father-son Coca-Cola product placement. On the drive home, Daddy Kale turns into Daddy Kale after they get into a car accident. A year later, Kale is taking a bit of a nap in Spanish class when the teacher wakes him up and asks him to tell the class what his plans are for the summer in Spanish. He bumbles his way through a few words before admitting that he didn't actually do his homework. Unimpressed, the teacher threatens to flunk him and asks him what his father would think, which prompts Kale to sock him in the face. After feeding his teacher a knuckle sandwich, Teach decides to feed him an assault charge, landing Kale in court where the judge takes it easy on him for losing his daddy and sentences him to house arrest, where Detective Viola Davis then fits him with a snazzy ankle monitor and informs him that if he steps off the property, the light on it will turn red and he'll have only 10 seconds to get back on the property or the cops will show up. And as if that wasn't enough of a buzzkill, it turns out that the cop that'll be keeping tabs on him happens to be the Spanish teacher's cousin. At first it's not so bad, but after his mother cancels his Xbox and iTunes subscriptions and then goes full authoritarian dictator and cuts the cord to the TV in his room, he's forced to find new ways to keep himself busy. So after making a half-assed attempt at doing some chores, he ends up on the losing side of a prank war between the neighborhood kids where he briefly forgets about his little ankle situation and immediately gets his first checkup from Constable Cousin. And while he's getting all cozy on the front lawn, he notices that he seems to have a smoking hot new neighbor. After his little run-in with Sergeant Spanish, he decides to set up a line around the yard so he doesn't forget to not leave the property. He then discovers that he doesn't need Xbox or iTunes to stay busy because there happens to be a world of entertainment right outside his window, and proceeds to start spying on his neighbors. One day, when his friend Ronald comes over, Kale breaks down the little soap opera happening outside his window. He points out his neighbor across the street who appears to be having an affair with his maid, his neighbor next door that seems to be obsessed with mowing his lawn, and the punks across the street that keep pranking him. And for the grand finale, he shows Ron his perfectly unobstructed view of his sexy new neighbor in her swimming pool. The next day, he waits for her to come home and then pretends to be struggling to get the mail so that she comes over and helps him. She does eventually come over and help him and introduces herself as Ashley. That night, he's downstairs watching TV when he notices a news story about a missing woman that was last seen being picked up by somebody in a blue 1960s Ford Mustang with a damaged front fender. Later, he gets distracted from spying on Ashley by the sound of his lawn-mowing-obsessed neighbor next door, Mr. Turner, pulling his car into his garage, so he takes a look and notices that he happens to have a blue 1960s Ford Mustang with a dented front fender. The next day, Ron comes over again, and while doing some Googling, they find out that the circumstances around the missing girl are similar to several murder kidnappings a few years ago, and the killer was never found. But their little investigation is interrupted by Ashley going for a dip in the pool, and while spying on her, Ron accidentally bumps into the window and gets her attention, prompting her to come over and see what they're up to. They give her a flimsy cover story about playing video games, and she's all like, "Oh, cool, I like video games, let's see what you're playing." After inviting herself in and taking a brief look around, she comes right out with it and asks Kale if he's been spying on the neighbors. And Ronnie pipes up and says that as a matter of fact, he has been spying on the neighbors, but not the smoking hot ones that go for sexy swims in their pools, just the old potentially serial killer ones that are obsessed with mowing their lawns. They tell her about the missing girl and the Mustang with the dented fender, so she takes a look and sees the Mustang but no dented fender. But she does notice some longhorn skulls in his garage, and Kale and Ronnie note that Texas is famous for longhorns, and the killer also happened to be from Texas, so Ashley decides to join in on their little stakeout. Ronnie brings over a bunch of camera gear, and Ashley does a bit more Googling about the Texas murders and discovers that apparently the bodies were hidden in the walls. Later that night, after setting up a bunch of camera gear pointed at his house, Mr. Turner shows back up with a date, and apart from having a mild heart attack when he picks up a knife to cut the tag off her dress, they don't really see anything that supports their little serial killer theory. So Ashley heads home, leaving Kale with a severe case of blue balls, this time closing the blinds for good measure. But a little while later, Kale hears some screaming coming from Mr. Turner's house and goes to take a look and sees the girl from before running around the house in a panic, seemingly trying to escape. While fumbling with the camera, he accidentally presses the flash, and when he looks back, he sees Mr. Turner looking right at him through the window. Just then, Ronnie calls him, and while frantically trying to tell Ron what he saw, the girl calmly leaves Mr. Turner's house seemingly completely fine. So Ronnie tells him that he needs to give it a rest. The next morning, while making breakfast, Kale has the crap scared out of him when Mr. Turner suddenly shows up in his kitchen. But his mom comes in a second later and says that she bumped into him at the grocery store and he helped her with a flat tire. So Turner proceeds to ask Kale's mom out for dinner and a movie. Later, Ashley swings by and says she doesn't blame Turner for asking her out since Kale's mom's hot, and she also seems a bit skeptical that anything happened with the girl that he saw in his house last night. So after poo-pooing all over his serial killer theory, she informs him that she's going to be having a party tonight and asks him to keep his binoculars in the drawer. So naturally, when the party gets started, Kale whips out his trusty binoculars and gets all butthurt when he sees Ashley hugging some other guy. So he sets up his speakers on the roof and starts blasting some fruity music over towards the party, prompting Ashley to climb through his window and threaten to chuck his iPod in the pool. But Kale sweet-talks her with some sappy horseshit about how deep and interesting he noticed she is while he's been spying on her since she moved in, so she caves in and gives him a smooch or two. Just then, Ashley hears some banging coming from Turner's house and looks over just in time to see him hauling what looks like a body wrapped in a tarp down the steps and into his garage. So the next day, while Turner's out doing some shovel shopping, Kale gets Ronnie to break into his car to get the code to his garage door so they can get inside and find out what's in the tarp. But while Ashley is following Turner around the store, she loses track of him and ends up bumping into him again in the parking garage, where he proceeds to hop in her car and take the keys while he creepily tells her that he knows that she's been following him and politely asks her to stop and to pass the message along to Kale before giving her back her keys and sending her on her merry way. Back at the house, Kale wants to call the cops, but Ashley says that they should just drop it and that it's not a cute little game anymore. So naturally, Kale decides to do the exact opposite of dropping it and starts pulling up the blueprints to his house while rigging up a remote camera transmitter thingy and making a door opener for his garage. And just as he finishes, Ronnie shows up all freaked out and says that he can't find his phone and that he must have dropped it in Turner's car, which conveniently presents Kale with the perfect opportunity to try out his handy new camera transmitter and garage door opener thingy that he just finished making. So while keeping a lookout from his window, he sends Ronnie over to Turner's place and once he makes it inside, monitors what's going on from his TV. When Ronnie gets in the garage, he notices that it smells like the corpse of a rotting hottie. And after finding his phone in Turner's car, he goes to take a look in the blue tarp to see what's inside and says that there's a lot of blood and that he thinks he can see hair. Just then, the garage door closes on its own and Ronnie says that he thinks somebody's in the garage with him. He screams and goes running through the house before the camera feed goes dead. So Kale runs over to Turner's house with a baseball bat, setting off his ankle monitor as he hops over the fence, and when he gets over there, the front door is already open. But right as he's about to go inside and save Ronnie, Sergeant Spanish shows up to rain on his parade. Kale tries to tell him about Ronnie being trapped in the house, but Turner comes out and says that he has no idea what he's talking about. And right as Constable Cousin is getting ready to cart Kale off to jail, Kale tells him that he has a body wrapped in a tarp in his garage. So they open up the garage and haul the tarp outside, but when they take a look inside, they don't find any rotting hotties and instead find the crusty, dismembered corpse of Bambi. Turner explains that he hit it with his car the other night and he just hadn't gotten around to burying it yet. They take him back to his house where his mother gives him the third degree and then says that she's going to head over to Turner's place to try and talk him out of pressing charges. So Kale goes to keep an eye on her from his window, but gets distracted by a text from Ron's phone telling him to look at his TV. And when he does, he sees what appears to be a dead Ronnie stuffed in his closet. But when he goes to take a look, he just finds a stupid old live Ronnie playing a dumb joke. Kale takes it about as well as you would expect, and after he calms down, he goes back to keeping an eye on his mom from the window while Ronnie plays the video of his great escape from Turner's house on the computer and heads downstairs to make a snack. Meanwhile, over at Turner's place, Kale's mom seems to have smoothed things over with him and is getting ready to head back home, but right as she gets through the door, Turner grabs her and smashes her head into the wall. As Ronnie's video plays, Kale notices something in the vent in Turner's house, so he pauses it and zooms in to get a closer look and sees what appears to be a corpse wrapped in plastic stuffed in the vent. So he starts screaming for Ron, who hears his friend frantically screaming his name, but figures whatever it is can wait until after snack time. But that idea immediately backfires when Turner sneaks up behind him with a baseball bat and hits a home run with his head. He tries to do the same thing to Kale, but Kale sees him coming in the reflection on the computer screen and makes a run for the kitchen where they tussle and scuffle for a bit before Kale makes a run for it outside. But Turner is able to grab him by the leg before he's able to get across the ankle monitor line and knocks him out, tapes him up, and drags him back inside, where he sits Kale down in a chair and then gets all comfy on the couch and goes over his entire diabolical plan for how he's going to cover up him, his mom, and Ron's murder. So after he's done with story time, he grabs a pen and paper and starts to force Kale to write a letter to Ashley saying that he killed Ronnie and his mom. But just then, Ashley suddenly decides to drop by in the middle of a thunderstorm for some reason, which distracts Turner long enough for Kale to sock him in the face and hop out into the hallway. where he and Ashley tag team up on Turner and knock him down the stairs and retreat back into Kale's room. Just long enough for Kale to cut himself free and try to call the cops, but Turner cuts the power to the house and comes busting through the door. So they make a run for it out the window and jump into Ashley's pool, where Kale tells her to call the cops while he goes to get his mom from Turner's place, arming himself with some garden shears on the way over. Meanwhile, Sergeant Spanish gets a call on the radio that Kale's monitor has gone off again and assumes that it's another false alarm, so he decides to finish his lunch before going to deal with it. Back at Turner's house, Kale hears his mom moaning from behind the wall and discovers a hidden room with a bunch of surgical stuff and some other women's belongings on a table. He pushes the table aside and discovers another hidden room that seems to lead beneath the house, and on his way down, he sees a bunch of car keys, seemingly from Turner's past victims, hung up on the wall. He heads a bit further and ends up falling through a floorboard into a pit filled with water and dead bodies. He manages to climb out of the corpse soup and then finds his mom tied up, where he then uses his trusty garden shears to cut her down. But she falls back right into the arms of Turner, who has somehow managed to teleport down there with them. He throws his mom to the ground and shoves Kale up against a wall and is about to do him in when Kale's mom pokes him in the leg with one of the random dead girl souvenirs he apparently has scattered all over the place. So Kale takes the opportunity to use his trusty garden shears to poke him right in the heartbone and push him into the corpse soup, finally solving his pesky serial killer neighbor problems once and for all. A few days later, Detective Viola Davis comes over to remove his ankle monitor for good behavior, so he immediately heads outside to get Ashley and bring her inside to bear witness to him finally getting revenge on the punky neighborhood kids by ratting them out to their mother for watching porn. And as they celebrate with a little makeout session, we see that Ronnie apparently survived Turner playing t-ball with his noggin and is creepily filming them in the corner. And they all live happily ever after, presumably until somebody else moves in next door for them to spy on.